The mansion felt like a prison to Miriam. The walls, once full of warmth and laughter, now seemed to close in around her with every passing day. She had always been a woman who appreciated her solitude, but now it felt suffocating. Richard was gone again, off on yet another business trip, leaving her to fend for herself in the empty house. The silence, so once familiar, had become unbearable. Even the servants, though polite and efficient, only added to the emptiness. Miriam had become accustomed to living in a gilded cage, but lately the bars felt like they were closing in, tighter and tighter. Her thoughts kept returning to Daniel, the driver who had somehow come to occupy more space in her heart than she ever intended. She had fought it for so long, the connection, the attraction, but it had grown too powerful to ignore. Each day, she found herself seeking out moments when she could be near him. She had started to look forward to the small things, his soft smile when he greeted her, the warmth in his voice when he asked if she was all right. It was as though he could sense the loneliness that dripped from her soul. It was in the way he spoke to her, in the way he listened, in the way he made her feel like she was the only person in the world. That day, as Miriam walked through the garden, the sunlight flickering through the trees, she spotted Daniel standing by the fountain, his hands resting on the stone edge. He was looking down at the water, seemingly lost in thought. The air around him seemed to vibrate with a quiet energy that drew her in, like a magnet. She felt her heart flutter in her chest, and without thinking, she found herself moving toward him. As she approached, Daniel turned, his eyes catching hers. There was a moment of stillness, a pause, as if time itself had stopped. Miriam's breath caught in her throat, and she felt a wave of heat wash over her. The attraction, once subtle, was now undeniable. His eyes, those dark, soulful eyes, held her captive. They spoke of understanding, of tenderness, and of something more, something that neither of them could put into words. "Mrs. Richardson," he said, his voice low, yet filled with warmth. "Daniel," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The sound of her name on his lips felt different now, more intimate. Her heart pounded, and for the first time she felt the weight of her emotions, emotions she had tried so desperately to suppress. "I didn't mean to interrupt your thoughts," he said, his voice soft and soothing. "But you seem lost." Miriam forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. She had always been good at pretending, at wearing a mask, but today the mask felt fragile. The cracks were showing. "I'm not lost," she said quickly, though it was a lie. She had been lost for so long. She had been adrift in a sea of isolation, of longing, and now Daniel had come into her life like a storm. He was the one thing she couldn't control, the one thing that made her feel alive again. There was a brief silence between them, heavy with the unspoken tension. Miriam's heart raced as she struggled to find the right words. She couldn't bring herself to speak the truth, to admit what had been growing between them. But her body was betraying her, pulling her toward him, inch by inch. I've been thinking about our conversations," Miriam said, her voice trembling. "You've made me realize things I didn't want to face." Daniel didn't respond immediately, but his expression softened. His eyes, which had always been so steady and calm, seemed to reflect the same storm that raged inside her. Miriam could feel the pulse of the moment, the slow burn that had been building between them, and she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. "You don't have to say anything, Mrs. Richardson," he said gently. "I don't expect anything from you." But it was too late for that. Miriam knew that this was no longer just about a simple connection or the comfort he provided. It was about something deeper, something that neither of them could ignore. She had fallen for him, and she had no idea how to stop. The words caught in her throat. She wanted to tell him to leave, to tell him to stop making her feel things she couldn't afford to feel. But as she opened her mouth, a wave of emotion crashed over her. Before she could stop herself, she took a step forward, closing the distance between them. Daniel didn't move. He didn't pull away. Instead, he stood there, his eyes locked on hers, waiting. Miriam's breath quickened as she moved closer, the weight of her desires heavier than ever. She felt her pulse in her ears, a rhythmic thrum that drowned out everything else. And then, without thinking, without considering the consequences, she reached up and cupped his face in her hands. It was a gentle touch, almost tentative, but it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Daniel's skin was warm beneath her fingers, and she could feel his breath catch, just as hers did. Their faces were inches apart now, and the air between them felt thick with anticipation. "Miriam," Daniel whispered, her name soft on his lips. His voice was like a touch, a caress, and it made her shiver. Before she could respond, before she could even think, Daniel closed the gap between them. His lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle at first, as if both of them were testing the waters. But the moment their lips touched, everything shifted. The kiss deepened, urgent and desperate, and all of the emotions Miriam had been suppressing for so long came rushing to the surface. She kissed him back with a fervor she didn't know she had in her. The world around them disappeared, the garden, the house, the cold emptiness of her life. There was only Daniel, and the undeniable pull that had drawn them together. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer, and for the first time in years, Miriam felt truly alive. The kiss was intoxicating, and yet it was dangerous. Miriam knew that. But at that moment, she couldn't bring herself to care. All the guilt, all the fear of consequences, melted away in the heat of the moment. This was what she had been craving, what she had needed for so long. And Daniel was the answer. When they finally pulled away, both of them breathless, Miriam's heart was pounding in her chest. She could barely look at him, too afraid of what had just happened. But as she met his gaze, she saw the same storm in his eyes, the same raw emotion that she had tried so desperately to hide. "I shouldn't have done that," Miriam whispered, her voice trembling with regret. Daniel reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We both knew this was coming," he said quietly, his voice filled with something that Miriam couldn't quite place. "But that doesn't make it any less dangerous." Miriam nodded, her mind spinning. She knew that nothing could ever be the same again. Their kiss had shattered something inside her, and she wasn't sure if she would ever be able to put the pieces back together. But one thing was certain, they had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Miriam stood frozen in place, her chest rising and falling with every breath. The intensity of the kiss still lingered on her lips, and the weight of what had just happened pressed down on her like a physical force. She could still feel the heat of Daniel's touch, the warmth of his arms around her, and the undeniable pull of his presence. But as the world around her slowly came back into focus, the gravity of their actions hit her with full force. What had she done? What had they done? She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and she knew that the consequences would be far-reaching. Her pulse thundered in her ears, drowning out the sounds of the garden, the house, and the world she had once known. Daniel, too, stood motionless, his hands still resting gently on her shoulders, as though he was afraid to pull away, afraid to break the fragile moment they had just shared. His eyes, dark and full of emotion, locked with hers, and for a brief moment Miriam saw the same conflict mirrored in them, desire mixed with regret, need entwined with guilt. Neither of them spoke for what seemed like an eternity. The silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of unspoken words, emotions they were both struggling to make sense of. Miriam's heart was racing, and every part of her wanted to flee from the situation, to run back into the safety of her marriage, back into the life she had carefully constructed. But there was no escaping the truth now. This wasn't just a fleeting moment. This wasn't something she could easily brush aside. In the brief seconds of that kiss, Miriam had felt something deep, something real, and it terrified her. How could she have let herself fall for someone like Daniel? How could she have let herself give in to the pull of something so dangerous? "I'm sorry," Miriam finally whispered, breaking the silence. The words felt like a confession, a prayer. "I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have let it happen." Daniel's grip on her shoulders loosened, and for a moment she thought he might step back, that he might break the distance between them. But instead, he stood still, his face a mixture of understanding and sorrow. "Miriam," he said softly, his voice a gentle echo of the same conflict that had stormed inside her. "We both knew this could happen. You don't need to apologize." The weight of his words hit her harder than she expected. She had tried to convince herself that it had been a moment of weakness, that it had been nothing more than a lapse in judgment, but Daniel was right. She had known, deep down, that this connection was inevitable. Every conversation, every glance, every touch had led them to this point. The desire had been there all along, lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be acknowledged. "Then why does it feel so wrong?" Miriam asked, her voice shaky, her emotions raw. "I've just ruined everything." Daniel shook his head slowly, his gaze steady. "You haven't ruined anything, Miriam. It wasn't a mistake. Not for me. But I understand how you feel. I know the position I'm in. This isn't something either of us planned, and I never wanted to make you feel like you had to choose." Miriam's heart twisted at his words. It wasn't just about the physical kiss, the brief moment of passion. It was everything that had led up to this, the loneliness, the longing, the realization that she had allowed herself to care for someone who, by all accounts, was off-limits. She swallowed, trying to steady her breath. "But it's not just about us, is it?" Her voice quivered as she spoke, the weight of her marriage, her life, bearing down on her. "This is my marriage, Daniel. My life with Richard. I can't just walk away from that. And I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending that everything's fine when it's not." Daniel's expression softened, and he stepped back, his hands falling to his sides. "I never wanted to be the cause of your pain, Miriam. I never wanted to make you choose. You deserve more than this. You deserve someone who can give you everything you need. Not just part of it." Miriam looked at him, her chest tightening as her emotions surged. His words were true, but they stung. They were both caught in this web of desire and guilt, and neither of them knew how to break free. Daniel was right in some ways. He wasn't the solution to her problems. He was only a reminder of what she had lost, what she had been missing in her marriage. But there was something in him, something she couldn't ignore. He made her feel alive, in a way that Richard hadn't in years. And that feeling was dangerous. It was a feeling that could unravel everything she had built, everything she had worked for. "What happens now?" Miriam asked, her voice small, vulnerable. Daniel hesitated, his gaze lingering on her face. "I don't know, Miriam. I don't know what happens now." His voice was quiet, but there was a weight to it. "But I do know that we can't keep pretending this isn't real. It's not just a fleeting moment. And whatever happens next, it's going to change everything." Miriam nodded, her heart aching as she realized how true those words were. She could feel the walls of her life shifting, crumbling under the weight of her own desires. The life she had worked so hard to protect, her marriage, her identity, was now hanging by a thread. "Do you think we can stop?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Daniel met her gaze, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes, something deeper than just longing. It was understanding, regret, and something else. Hope. He didn't answer her question directly. Instead, he stepped back even further, creating space between them. "Maybe we can stop," he said, his voice low. "Maybe we will. But right now, we're both caught in something we can't ignore. And I think, deep down, you know we won't be able to walk away from this so easily." Miriam didn't know what to say. She was torn between the desire to walk away, to fix everything, and the fear that if she walked away now, she would lose the only thing that had made her feel whole in years. She had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable, but for the first time, she realized that the decision to move forward, or to retreat, was entirely in her hands. And that realization terrified her.